Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome, Lionel. This is especially for you, a story of the two patriarchs in my family, the two fathers. So, this also goes out to someone very special who's connected now. And I haven't seen you since, I don't know, 2009, 2008, since your wedding. And you met my ex-boyfriend from Manchester, England. Yeah. Hi, Sophia. You're out there on the East Coast. And I just want to say I love you and happy birthday. It's a belated birthday. Because see, Lionel, she's also a Gemini. And she is the baby of all the grandchildren concerning the true patriarch of the family, the real father. Okay, Grandpa Edward. And it also is an important thing, especially in the United States here with Pride Week, because her dad, Sophia, your dad, we'll call him Sasha, he was the twin brother to my mom, Sarah, the magical twins. I'll show you a photo. This is the two of them. Don't know if you can see it. When they're children, post World War II, living in Hamburg, Germany. And it's important, Sophia, because your dad went through kind of a rebellious state, which was kind of risky, kind of dicey, when they settled after the Korean War to Colorado, to Fountain, Colorado. And a special thing about family is Grandpa Edward, he had two twin brothers. He had a big family of siblings, but he had two twin brothers. One of them in particular, Uncle Benny, had a restaurant out in Wisconsin. And your dad, instead of rebelling, he was forced to go live with Uncle Benny. And Grandpa, the oldest of the family, the oldest of the kids, loved Benny. And there was a secret about Benny, that he was gay. There's a photograph somewhere, I think Babushka might have it, and I know my sister Jewel has it, of Benny dressed in drag back in the 1920s. But he owned a restaurant, and he took in your dad and took care of him for his brother and made him work. And that was before your dad went into the military, in the Navy during Vietnam. And it just goes to show how brothers can be there and love each other. It's another magical thing about Geminis. Okay, so let's get started. We're gonna go to the other side, on the side of the wall over here. That is my dad's side of the family. Okay. Now, his name is John Henry Williamson. He was born in 1922, and his dad is not on the wall. He referred to his dad as that son of a bitch. Because when his dad married his mother, who's the oldest girl of the three sisters in the center, her name's Esther, he beat her up. He was a bootlegger, and he was a violent drinker. And she was not allowed to divorce, and it was kind of a calamity in the family, and it really affected her. She had 3 children, and they all had to be split up. Now, John, my dad, during the Great Depression, lived with his grandfather, Donald, and the other siblings, a brother and sister, were separated with other families, and that affected them immensely. It put kind of a, we'll say, a sword into it, and it affected them psychologically. So John was born in 1922, and I have a photo of him here, okay, where my thumb is with the tie. He was in the Navy during World War II. He grew up in Humbleton, Oregon, and lived in kind of a life of poverty with his mom. But his grandparents, Isabella and Don, they took him in and pretty much raised him. And he went to a small little one-room school in Humbleton, Oregon. And then he continued on into the tiny high school there. And they discovered that he was really good at playing sports, in particular football. He ended up getting a scholarship to go to Phoenix, Arizona in high school with a couple of his buddies. They were all cousins. And they went there and played football. Eventually, he ended up doing really well, and he got a scholarship to go to the University of New Mexico. And that's like, in the late 30s. And he was a guard for the University of New Mexico, and they played different, upscale like college games and stuff like that. And then he decided, rather than being drafted, because World War II was coming about, he decided to go enlist in the Navy, since he was the oldest. And then his brother wouldn't have to worry about going into the war. His younger brother didn't go. So he served. He got all his training and was a seaman. And they were on a large ship toward the end of the war, headed into the sea on into Okinawa. And by the time they got there, the war had ended. So they had to turn around and come back. I wish he was alive today, because him and I could have debated. He's a Cancer, by the way. We could have debated about the protests going on, not just with the naval seamen out there, because the government wanted to continue with its imperialism into the Philippines. And so the naval officers and the merchant marines, guys like that, were protesting against it to come home. So, but government history, United States history twists that around. So anywho, that's another story. So John comes back, and with his grandfather, Don, who's, taking care of him. And after Grandma Isabella, she was getting old. Eventually, she died. But it was the 2 men, the grandfather and my dad. He had a farm, and he grew mainly hops here. This is from a hop vine at a tavern. It's kind of outside the tavern, so I thought I'd clip a little branch. And Fia knows from visiting Humboldt, Oregon, that there's a ton of hop fields. You don't want to chew gum around there when they're in season, because the pollen of the hops will get in your mouth and it tastes like stale beer. It's really gross and yucky, right? So he has a farm. He's a happy bachelor. And he started dating, out in Arizona and New Mexico, a lot of beautiful women, you know. And then he's concentrated on his work in Humboldt, Oregon, and has a lot of really good employees. A lot of them are from Mexico. And he's taking care of, Grandpa Don. And then in 1952, at the age of 32, he had a case of what he thought was a really bad flu. He had a huge fever. He got up one day and he collapsed. His legs gave out on him. And luckily, another cousin of ours was the town doctor who lived right across the street. And that's when the rodeo stadium for Humbleton was new and everything. And the doctor came over and checked on him and sent him to the Veterans Hospital up in Portland, Oregon. And they discovered that he was inflicted with polio. They had to put him in an iron lung for a long time. That's the only way he quit smoking cigarettes. But he came home eventually, and he had to learn to deal with the life of being a paraplegic. He ended up going back to school, and that's where eventually he became a draftsman. He didn't finish his schooling, though, but that's eventually what led to him meeting my mom one day. So, Sarah, So, let's see. Photographs. This is an important photo from his father's side of the family, that son of a bitch, the Williamsons. So, the first settler here, I don't know if you can see it, is Scotch-Irish, Mr. Williamson. He was over in Ireland working at a mill. He made the mistake, but he didn't think it was a mistake. He fell in love with this lady here, a Protestant girl, his boss's daughter. And he's Catholic, okay? He's also not true Irish like her. He's, Scottish and Catholic. Well, the boss threatened to kill him. They ran away to America. First to New York, then to California, found some gold in the gold rush, and came on up to Oregon. They had a set of twins. Yeah, John and Henry. They died on the journey. So Dad's side of the family has a curse. A lot of those Celtics have their little curses. And it was said never to name any sons after the twins. But Dad and his dad's dad and then my brother are all named John Henry. So that kind of leads to the story too. And then also I want to show the totem of the Williamsons. It's very important. This leads back into history even further. So this is the Williamson totem here. See how the colors are dark. They were Highlanders who were night watchmen back in the day to guard the king. going way, way back before King James. So they had to camouflage to hide in the night. And, that's a good story. All those Celtic clans had colors for their kilts, and each color symbolized a duty and what they stood for, to go along with their other totem, which is their coat of arms. But look at me talking on and on and on and on and on. So, Dad had a hard childhood. He really did. And in that town, in the house where he was born, where his grandparents lived, where his granddad lived, I'll show a picture of the granddad. Don't know if you can see this photo very clearly. That's the house I grew up in, where Dad was born. And that man right there, that's Grandpa Don, is the finest house in town. And Dad had to climb and crawl and live up to certain standards. And it seemed like every time this little cancer crab would try and reach for those goals, they'd be taken away for whatever reason. Just bad luck, I suppose. And I would listen to his stories. He was the storyteller. Men would come from all over, not just relatives, but also hierarchs connected to the family and Oregon history. And because his grandfather knew a lot of detail, in a Victorian style household, very, very, very old-timey. But he knew a lot of the truths. So some of the more higher-ups who really wanted to get Hamilton out on the map and affiliated with Oregon history, they would twist a lot of the history up to make it seem more Irish and all of that. Just a load of crap, because people in the United States, they want to look important and they want to have those European ties. Well, Dad knew the truth, and he would put his foot down and point that out. And he had a memory. He was sharp as a tack, and he had a lot of talent with communicating with people, and it really helped him as a paraplegic. Eventually, when he retired from drafting, because he didn't really want to retire. He's like, what am I going to retire to? He didn't retire till he was 69, actually. And he got some computer training because he was a good typist from back in the day. He really only took the typing classes so he could flirt with cute girls, but it gave him a skill that would help him out in the future. But he would welcome people in, a lot of farmers and engineers who didn't know the old roads. And he knew everything about the roads. Not only did he draft the maps, but he knew all the important history. And he made a lot of friends. And looking back at it, I wish I could have told him, you're a wonderful person. I kind of told him toward the end, when we started getting along later on after Mom died. I kind of forced it out of him, and I kept it a secret. It was our secret from the siblings and other relatives. And I wish I would have. This is out to Sophia and also Lionel too. You should know about this. Him and I would talk a lot after my mother died, and my guardians, my guardian's father was my dad's best friend since they were 4, and they wanted me to make dad cough up money of past child support. And my dad was a real skinflint, and wanted to hold on to money. The divorce was horrible, and he really wanted to punish mom. Very sad, very, very uncalled for. But rather than making him cough up the money, I would visit a lot, and we rekindled our love for each other. And I wanted questions answered instead of money. And I got them answered. And it created a bond. And we kept it. We kept it from the other siblings. We kept it from the relatives. I'll show you another photo. This is a really good one. This is during the Great Depression. And this is Dad. I don't know if you can see it clearly. It's kind of faded there. The light's not very good because this is nighttime. But he's number 3 there. And then the littler boy is his little brother. And they're standing with some relatives, some men. You know, they were mostly hop and strawberry farmers. It kept things going in that tiny town during an economic crisis that affected the whole world. And Dad and I ended up loving each other. And he passed away at the age of 80. He could have lived longer. But you know, that side of the family and money and dog-eat-dog competition, it really screwed things up altogether. They didn't see beyond that. They didn't see love and what family should be. So there, that's Dad's side of the story. Now, we're going to go into his father-in-law, the rival, Edward Ozian. So, that's a mystery name because they were very dark olive. You call it black Deutsch. And they came from Hamburg. Before that, nobody knew. And the relatives over there during the time of the war, the Nazis traced every family in Germany, and then later all the countries that were taken over by the Reich. They traced every family back 200 years. And if you had anything according to their eyes gauche or weird or unacceptable, you were sent to labor camps. And those labor camps developed into camps of death. It was all about labor. And the Nazis could not prove with anything that this family, even though they were olive with really dark brown hair and dark brown or gray eyes, that they were Jewish or gypsy or anything else. They were all mainly teachers and educators. We have one ancestor, a woman. Before then, she was a silent film star. But that's another story. I don't know that much about it. But, you know, they traced them back, and they belonged to the Church of England. They were Episcopalian faith. So having that missing lineage really saved their asses altogether. And Grandma and Grandpa learned a lot about that when they were stationed after the war. So, Grandpa. Sophia remembers him too, and she remembers his orchard when he eventually settled down Moonshine Hollow and had all those cherries and had apples and cows, and just, it was a wonderful place. It was a wonderful place to visit and play. It was my escape. In the center of the orchard was a fig tree. This is from my little fig tree out in my yard. It was planted in the yard when I was married to my husband, soon to be my ex-husband, and I dug it up. I put it in a large pot because the fig tree symbolizes stability and family, and I didn't feel that in my marriage. So there, power of magical thinking. So now it's in my yard in a large pot. So, Grandpa, where do I begin? There's a lot of good photos. He was born, here's him as a little boy. Let's see, that's not very clear. That's much better. With some of his siblings and his beloved mother. Grandpa Ed was the oldest, excuse me, of a bunch of kids. And he was born in Wisconsin. But the Germans, they call it Visconsin. A lot of German immigrants go over there. They have really, really good cheese. Very, very hard workers. He was an independent thinker, very artistic, learned how to play the accordion at a young age. He didn't get along with his dad. That's the other son of a bitch. But he's on the wall over here on this side. We're going to call him Gus. Came over from Hamburg. Treated Ed's mom like shit, which is really sad because she was a wonderful woman. She eventually remarried a really nice man and was able to live her life out in comfort. And she would visit Moonshine Hollow. I never knew her, but I think my sister may have met her, or, you know, she saw my sister when she was a baby. Ed was different, and him and his dad clashed over a lot of things. They eventually, when Ed was a child, they eventually moved over from Wisconsin to Idaho for work. And Ed couldn't take the abuse anymore. At the age of 15, he ran away. He regretted leaving his siblings behind. But, you know, hopping on trains, hanging out with his buddies. But he needed to do more. He wanted more out of life. So, guess what? He lied about his age, and he joined the Navy at the age of 16. Served 4 years. During that time, you know, he had to have a couple dressing downs from the other officers. He ended up in a fight, Grandma told me, where he got his nose broken. And then after that, after he served, he started going to the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. And did basic courses, played a little bit of sports. He loved golf. I know Sophia out there, she remembers. He loved golf. And he met Grandma, the oldest of her family, and this is important. Her relatives were a mixture of German and English immigrants. They have a little bit of Cherokee Indian. Oh, to go back, I'm sorry, my dad's side of the family has Iroquois. You know, Mohawk is connected to the Iroquois tribe. But on my great grandfather's side here, they were Mormon. And this is him here with the glasses on. And I don't know if you can see it quite clearly. There's a little bit better. He's holding my grandma, who became the wife of Ed. And her name is also Esther. They're working on the railroad in Idaho. She had other siblings later on, a ton of kids. And then down there, the little dog in the middle was a guard dog. He would be tied to a post, and he performed a special labor of helping to keep an eye on Grandma when she was a little girl. And that her father was a very good man. And even though there were religious differences, because Grandma eventually, as soon as she turned 18, she didn't want to be a Mormon anymore. But that's another story, and it makes a lot of sense. The father-in-law really accepted Ed and knew that he was a good person. And even though he was Episcopalian, he wasn't religious at all. He just wanted to be a good human being. And he loved Grandma so much. He referred to her to me a couple of times when I was little, that was his doll. And there's a song by the Mills Brothers called Paper Doll. And Grandpa had that album. And he caught me playing it one day on the record player. And then he kind of told me what I could understand as being a little kid, what that was all about. But that was kind of his song to her. So, going back, Ed eventually enlisted in the Army, and he earned his oats, moving up the ladder gradually. He was supposed to be stationed on the USS Arizona back in 41, before December, before the tragedy of Pearl Harbor. He would have been on that boat. He would have died. He referred to the twins as being special, and Grandma did too. Sasha and Sarah. They were born in October, Scorpios. And them being born at Fort Lewis in Washington, that hospital is now a museum. But them being born there prevented Ed from having to go over to Hawaii, because it wasn't just the Navy men who perished. They were prepping. They were getting all kinds of military over there. So it included the Army as well. So he knew, though, that eventually he would be stationed out. And by luck of the draw, after the war was ending, he was stationed over in Hamburg, Germany, before they built the wall, when things were still really dangerous. It was after the first of the Army, who are mostly African American men, were stationed over there. They were the first to go into Germany. They kind of served as arrow fodder. But Grandpa became friends with a lot of those men. Went over there, and after the twins were born, and then after 4 years, he sent for Grandma and for the twins. They were 4 years old, to live over there in Germany. They got connected to a lot of relatives, a lot of love there. Grandma would help gather food and like scraps and what she could do, fabric, her and the other military wives, for the poor. They were able to connect with relatives. Grandpa would do jobs being on guard of the German prisoners. It wasn't just Nazis, there were regular German army men too. And since he was bilingual, he would get to know a lot of these people. And he also connected with a lot of relatives. He felt, according to Grandma, that he was serving a purpose. And even with all the tragedy, and as they started peeling all of this history, the aftermath, the things that the Nazis tried to hide, it kept them going, even though they saw a lot of horrible things out there. And then when he would get time off, he would take Grandma. They would go dancing. They'd go to France or they'd go to Spain. He took Grandma, and maybe Sasha knows this story, to bullfights out in Spain. And she told me of a story one day. She's looking in the crowd during a bullfight, and she sees Picasso with one of his mistresses. Is just floored. And even though they were both from poor working class families or poor farming families, they pinched their pennies, and he would drench her in furs and jewelry, and they bought, a lot of little trinkets and things to bring back home eventually. So after that, when the twins were about 9, they came back to the United States for a short while, but then they were stationed again to be on the island of Okinawa. By then, Ed was in a branch of the Army before the CIA. I forget the title of it, but I'm sure I could look it up. I think I have it written down somewhere. But it was part of the secret branch of the Army. And so the twins, they went to high school on that island. They didn't see Grandpa very often at all. And he saw some things that he wasn't allowed to talk about, Grandma would say. A special incident before they came back. This is during Korea. But he saw a special incident. Maybe he was involved. Maybe he had to help with killing, or he saw innocent lives being killed, prisoners. Because, people are human beings. But he saw something awful, and it drove him into a kind of depression, and he was wanting to just come back home. He knew he still had to serve a little bit longer in his career. But here's a good story about Ed. Sophia, you know about this. You know about Monkey Joe. So right before they're coming back from the United States, Grandpa's out in a market somewhere in Japan near where they lived. And besides fruits and vegetables, you have livestock, you have birds, chickens, whatever, all kinds of food. Well, in a cage to be sold as food was a small rhesus monkey. Ed saw that monkey, and looking back at it, and I wish he was alive today, because I'd like to ask him questions. I think, in a way, he saw that monkey as himself, in a cage, being ready to be sold as food to be eaten, to have his brains eaten. Grandpa bought the monkey, and he hooked up with a couple of his buddies. When they came back to the United States, he brought the monkey back. And Monkey Joe, when Grandpa was going through a bout of drinking, because the job had become, stressful, but that monkey was his therapy. So not only could he play the accordion, but he had this monkey, and he also had a monkey on his back. But he got through it. So they come back to the States. They were in Little Rock, Arkansas around the mid-50s, and he got him restationed to Fountain, Colorado. And then after serving the career over there, when he was getting ready to retire, they ended up buying a bit of land called Moonshine Hollow, right next to a group of people who own that house and that area of land to this day. I visited that house a few years back. Francis went with me. But the Mennonites loved him, and he loved them. He loved all his neighbors, and they would work together and help out each other. The church was right next door. And when Grandpa died, Grandma didn't have to lift a finger. The Mennonites had his funeral all taken care of at their church. And then the military, they buried him with honors in 81 at the Veterans Cemetery in Portland, Oregon. But Lionel and Sophia, Lionel, especially you, because you want to see the pictures on the wall. Okay, I'm going to quit going on here. Here's a good photo of Granddad. I actually have it next to me as a little girl, a photo that he took of me, and you could always tell it was his photograph because he'd accidentally have his thumb in the picture. But I'm looking up to him and smiling at him. But here's a good photo of him. He was ambidextrous. He could use both hands. And the odd thing about it, too, the guy was colorblind. And yet, he served all those years in the military. They kept the color blindness a secret. And I remember oftentimes visiting that house as much as I could to spend the night. Me and my siblings, my brothers, would ask Grandma Esther, Grandma, why does nothing match? All the furniture, you know, the lamp is this turquoise blue, and then the couch is green, and this over here is red. What is this? It's all nice, but, you know, it clashes. And she said, those were gifts that your grandfather got from me. And he's colorblind, but we're not going to talk about it. I appreciate those gifts. Leave them alone. They're beautiful to me. So, just thought that was interesting. Then another good photo. This is a great Gemini thing here. This is him in Fountain, Colorado in the 1950s. He's right there where my finger is. He was a crooner, and he sang with various people, and he loved jazz and big band. That was his pop music, you know. And but he would do recordings that would end up on local radio stations and programs out there. And he taught me how to sing. So I just think that's a wonderful thing. He was a good person. He wasn't perfect. And, you know, he had a hard time with boys or men who would misbehave. With girls, unlike my dad, he was a little bit more understanding with the girls. And I think it was just a connection back when he was little about how his mother was being treated. And he just had a special understanding. He wasn't perfect. And I think the arguments that he had between him and his son, it did cause a rift, you know. It caused a lack of communication between the two of them. But, you know, at that house, he always had that bedroom for Uncle Sash. And then he had the bedroom for my mom, for Sarah there, upstairs on his level. But, you know, he did the best he could. And he was happy on that orchard. Um, he didn't really do it for profit. It was more like a type of therapy. And he wanted it, you know, for Grandma to have a comfortable life. They really wanted to have that life together. And I didn't realize how spoiled I was being surrounded by all that vegetation, all that beautiful stuff. They even had spring water from the creek where him and I would go out and we'd watch the turtles in the creek. And it's just a beautiful thing. So that's pretty much the crust of the story. I don't know what else to show. It's a good one, though. You know, we try to love our fathers. Oh, here's one more thing that I almost forgot. My dad and my grandpa, Sophia knows this, they didn't get along at all. Mom ended up getting knocked up when she was 19 by another soldier. I think he was a lieutenant or a captain. And she was pregnant with my oldest sister, Jewel, who's 10 years older than me. Mom felt hook, line, and sinker for this guy. He had red hair. We're going to call him Ray, like the rays in the sun. And this is over, the guy is near Vancouver, I believe. Maybe he grew up there, I don't know. Jewel knows more about it, but, you know, Mom rarely talked about him. Because Dad ended up adopting Jewel. But Mom got knocked up. She didn't know what to do. She was happy at first. She thought she was going to marry this guy. When the guy found out, he told her he was already married. And it really sunk deep in her. It really broke her heart. When she told her parents, they loved her. They're like, you know, continue living here and we'll help you. And she ended up going to school and then also working at the cannery, the bird's eye plant down there near Moonshine Hollow with Grandma. And eventually she met my dad. But I'll tell ya, Christmas dinners, oh my gosh, Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners at my grandparents' house, they would never come to my house. They would never come to my mom and dad's house. But we go over there. Dad was a lot stricter because of his Victorian upbringing than Grandpa was. Grandpa was a lot more lenient in a lot of ways. Dad would try and brag about the war, even though he wasn't in any kind of battle. Grandpa must have seen some shit go down. Real scheisse here, okay? Where a real soldier will not brag and will not be necessarily so patriotic about it. They kind of keep it to themselves. But at Christmas dinner one day, and I would always sit across from Grandpa, and I could see him in front of me, and everybody else is sitting on the sides. Well, Dad one day during Christmas was bragging about the war and President Roosevelt and all that jazz, and would talk on and on and on. That's another thing Dad was known for, was ranting. Grandpa was more quiet. If he had something to say, he'd say it. If he didn't have anything to say, he wouldn't say nothing. But during that conversation, Grandpa spoke up and made the whole room silent. He looked at my dad and he said, "You don't know what the hell you're talking about." and it just shut Dad up. And then Grandma, who, by the way, was 15 years younger than Grandpa, so she had a kind of a connection with Dad. She would kind of calm things down and would say, "Oh, well, I think the pie is almost ready." She'd try and change the subject, but I remember looking up at Grandpa during that moment. I think I must have been like 6 years old, and Grandpa kind of looked at me and winked, and then just kind of kept going on. And then after the dinner, he'd get out the accordion and he'd play a little bit. So it's just funny how those two kind of clash. You got a Cancer, you got a Gemini. So I think that's it. That's the story of the fathers. And I hope you like it. I hope you comment. And if you have questions or if you want me to talk about some other stuff in a future video, please let me know. And remember to ring the bell.